We are now ready to talk about the lower half of the body and their appendages, starting with the pelvic girdle. And pelvic girdle is not really a term we used, but is formed by pairing of the hip with our pelvic bone. So pelvic girdle includes the sacrum, coccyx, as well as the actual bones of the pelvis. So what they're doing is attaching the lower limbs to the axial skeleton, and it's transmitting the weight of the upper body to those lower limbs. So it's kind of like a meeting point between the upper body and the legs, which are really going to take all of the weight, and then it's supporting the visceral organs of the pelvis. So our reproductive organs, our digestive organs are housed inside of this structure. And number 1 on your little diagram of the lower body is not pointing to any particular structure within the pelvis, so we're just going to call that the pelvic girdle. Okay, so the picture we have here is the two halves, or I should say the pelvis split into half. So we are going to look at the individual bones of the pelvis. And so what you're seeing here is it's split in half, and we have bones that are fused together. So there's kind of a lot going on. But the first pelvic bone that we have is the ilium. And if we look over here, the ilium is like the top little elephant ear portion, what we would normally consider to be like your hip. So if we look at our diagram that you have on that same page, the ilium is going to be referring to number 1. Next, we have the ischium. And if we look down here, the ischium is referring to what would be the back half of the little opening that we have on the lower portion of the pelvis. And so that would be referring to number 2 on our diagram. And then we have the pubis, which forms your pubis bone. So it is towards the front, and the two halves are going to meet together at the front lower portion of the pelvis. And so that is going to be number 4. That is all of the bones that are actually making up the pelvis, but we have some additional structures that we want to talk about. And first we have the acetabellum, and this is articulating with the head of our limb, our lower leg, our femur. And the acetabellum would coordinate to number 5 in your diagram. And last but not least, we have the obturator foramen, which is number 3 in your diagram. So a foramen is a hole, so it's the hole here which a bunch of nerves and all kinds of things are going to pass through. All right, and before we move on entirely from our pelvis, we first want to talk about how it is we can tell the difference between a female and a male pelvis, which we can, in fact. So if we look at our first picture here, we're comparing 1 versus 2. And if you look at the angle that we have inside here, in number 1, it's a very sharp angle, and on 2, it has a much larger angle. And part of this is because females go through childbirth, and so they need this wider angle to allow, a child's head to pass through. A second thing that we can look at is the opening at the top of the pelvis. So we can see in either one of these pictures here, but if we look at the opening at the top for the male, we have our sacrum and our coccyx in the way inside of this circle. But if we're looking downward into the female's opening, there is much more space, and they're kind of tilted back out of the way, again, allowing a child's head to pass through. All right, and now we're moving on to the femur. So going back to your original lower body diagram, this will be number 2. And while we're at it, I'm not actually going to specify or have anything else to say about number 3, so we can go ahead and add that one on there, and that is going to be the patella, but nothing special to talk about for that one. So focusing on the femur, this is what we would know as like your thigh bone. The first structure that we need to talk about is the head of the femur, and the head is always going to point to the medial side, right, because it's connecting towards the middle of your body. So if you're confused about what is your anterior view or your posterior view, just keep that in mind, that it's always going to point towards the middle of the person. So in your diagram, the two sides match the anterior and posterior views, which makes number 1 our head of the femur. And anytime that we have a head, that is also going to mean that we have a neck. So number 2 of our diagram is pointing to the neck. Okay, and again, sorry, the femur should be easy, one bone to learn, but yet we have all of these little descriptive things to know about the femur. And so really, one of those we have is the greaters and lesser trochanters. And so trochanter is kind of one of those things like a tubercle where it's just a rounded projection where muscles or ligaments are going to attach to. So if we first look at the greater trochanter, the greater trochanter is going to be number 3 in our diagram. And the lesser trochanter is going to be number 4 in our diagram. Next, we have the medial and lateral condyles. So again, medial should be on the head side, lateral to the outside. And so the medial condyle is referring to number 8. And our lateral condyle is referring to number 9. The next kind of accessory structure we have is medial and lateral epicondyles. And so if we think about what this prefix means, epi, it means above. So we're going to look above our condyles. And these are for ligament attachment. Okay, so if we look medial side again, that is going to be referring to number 7 in our diagram, whereas the lateral condyles or epicondyles are going to be referring to number 5. And the last structure we have for our femur is the patellar groove. So this is going to be the groove where your patella fits in. And so that is going to be only seen on our anterior, our front side, right? Because your patella is not on the back side. And that is going to be referring to number 6. The next bones we have are of the lower leg or the calf, and that is the tibia and the fibula. Most people like to pronounce these and like kind of combine the words of saying tibia and fibia, but it's actually fibula. So if you put fibia, it will be wrong. It is fibula. So looking back to your lower body diagram, our tibia is the larger bone in your calf, and so that is going to be pointing to number 4. And your fibula is the smaller bone off to the side, and that is number 5. All right, back to the diagram with the femur. So now we're moving down to the bottom portion. So again, this one should be more simple. There's only 2 bones and only a few of those extra things to talk about for this one. So the tibia is the larger bone, and it's supporting most of the weight of our body. Some things to know about the tibia, we have medial and lateral condyles again. So medial side is going to be the side with the tibia, and so that is referring to number 1. Which makes number 2 our lateral condyles, and these are actually connecting with the condyles that you just saw on your femur. Next, we have the medial malleolus, and so the medial means we're going to be on the middle side, so the tibia side, and malleolus is the inner portion of what makes up your ankle, and so that is number 3. Okay, so now if we look at the fibula side, the fibula is articulating with the tibia, not the femur. So the fibula is not supporting that much weight. So if you actually recall, there was a story shared about a girl who ran cross country with a broken fibula. Why she was able to do this with a broken leg is because it was the fibula and it wasn't supporting her weight, which is what allowed her to still actually be able to run. So the only additional thing we need to know about the fibula is, again, now our ankle, but we're looking at the outside of our ankle, and so that is going to be number 4, the lateral malleolus. So we have 2 blanks left that need filled in, so I just want to make sure we remember which bone is which. So number 5 is your tibia, and number 6 is your fibula. All right, now we are looking at the skeleton of the foot. And if you remember, we have similar layout to our hands. So we have phalanges, that's what is making up your toes. Then we have our metatarsals rather than carpals, and your tarsals making up the ankle portion of your foot. So we have 7 tarsals. We have 5 metatarsals. and then our phalanges. So like we named our thumb, we also name our big toe. And so for us, the big toe is the hallux. So now we are ready to name each of our tarsals. So just like we had a saying for our hand, we also do for our feet. And in your feet, we want to turn our paper upside down to look at them in this direction, or you want to, I guess, start from the top and work your way down. But the mnemonic device that we have is that tiger cubs need milk, as in M-I-L-C. All right, so let's go through them. So first, for letter J is going to be our, okay, so first we're going to start with letter I, and I is referring to our talus, or the T in our tiger cubs. And then kind of sitting underneath our talus is our letter J, the calcaneus. And the calcaneus is the one that I hold up all the time, that I say how nasty it looks, that it's just sticking out there all by itself. The calcaneus is your heel. Okay, so now if we look at K and we are moving down or up, depending how you're looking at it, we are moving on to the navicular, and that is referring to the tiger cubs need, the N for need. Okay, the next three we need to differentiate that they all are using this cuneiform. So you are just needing to specify which one it is. So we have three of them, a medial, intermediate, and lateral. So on the medial is going to be the very inside one, and so that is going to be M for the M in our milk. Then next to that with our N, we have the intermediate cuneiform, or the I. Then for letter O, we have the lateral cuneiform. And then lastly, we have our L of the cuboid. So following this pattern of tiger cubs need M-I-L-C, need milk.